About the book, in a world increasingly defined by religious strife, Jonathan Kirsch, acclaimed author of The Harlot by the Side of the Road, offers a captivating exploration of the historical roots of religious intolerance and God against the gods *. This timely narrative traces the epic battle between classical paganism, with its embrace of diverse deities and beliefs, and the monotheistic fervor that sought to dominate it. With his signature blend of wit and rigorous scholarship, Kirsch navigates the tumultuous 4th century, spotlighting the pivotal clash between two influential Roman emperors, Christian Constantine and pagan Julian, whose legacies forever reshaped the course of history and the landscape of belief. Chapter 1: Against All the Gods of Egypt. A young pharaoh's experiment in monotheism and why it failed. Introduction to Akhenaten. The chapter begins by highlighting a groundbreaking archaeological discovery at Tel El Amarna that challenges traditional beliefs about the origins of monotheism. It reveals the life of Pharaoh Akhenaten, who worshipped only one god, Aten, as opposed to the many deities of ancient Egypt. Unlike Moses, Akhenaten developed a unique form of monotheism that ultimately failed after his death. Polytheism. In ancient Egypt, Egyptians were ardent polytheists, worshipping a wide array of deities, each represented by animals and even vegetables. Traditions were deeply rooted in the political structure, with pharaohs seen as divine figures themselves who depended on the acceptance and recognition from priests of these gods. Akhenaten's revelation. Frustrated with the polytheistic norms, Akhenaten changed his throne name to honor Aten and forbidden the worship of other gods. His reforms included the closure of rival temples, and he implemented a radical new religion based on the exclusive worship of Aten, defined symbolically by the sun, disk, and devoid of images or idols. Challenges to Akhenaten's monotheism. Despite Akhenaten's fervor and creative innovations in religious practices, he failed to gain widespread acceptance among the Egyptian populace. This led to significant distrust and resentment towards him, which culminated in the erasure of his legacy and the reinstatement of the worship of other gods after his death. Speculation on influences. Various theories explore Akhenaten's motivations, suggesting influences from family, particularly his mother or wife, and the political rivalries among different priesthoods that shaped his religious choices. Economic factors also played a role, with priestly factions vying for influence and resources. Legacy of Akhenaten's monotheism. The chapter explores how Akhenaten's radical ideas may have had lingering effects on later monotheistic religions, including Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Certain elements of Akhenaten's hymns and the solar imagery have parallels in Hebrew scriptures. Critique of monotheism. The text highlights a fundamental conflict within monotheism, noting that it often leads to exclusivity and violence against non-believers. The history of monotheistic faith is characterized by zealotry, often expressed through punitive actions against those deemed unfaithful. Both Akhenaten and Yahweh are portrayed as failures to convert their people completely, leading to catastrophic outcomes for those who strayed from their commands. Conclusion. The narrative presents an ongoing struggle between monotheism and polytheism, illustrating the tension that arises from such rigid belief systems. It suggests that both Akhenaten's and Yahweh's experiences reflect broader themes of divine jealousy and human faithfulness, underscoring the potential for violence embedded within the most fervent manifestations of monotheistic belief. Example. Key point: the futility of monotheism in polytheistic societies. Example. Imagine standing amidst the grandeur of ancient Egypt, where vibrant rituals honoring multiple gods echo across the temples. Now envision a young Pharaoh, filled with ambition and a desperate desire for spiritual innovation, demanding that his people abandon all other deities in favor of a single sun god, Aten. Despite his fervent proclamations and the sweeping closure of competing temples, you feel the palpable tension and resentment in the air. Your neighbors whisper discontentedly about the rituals that have been lost and the divine powers they've forsaken. As you navigate this turmoil, you understand that there is an inherent resistance to such radical change, demonstrating how Akhenaten's dream of singular worship clashed with the deeply entrenched polytheistic traditions, leading to his ultimate failure. Critical thinking. Key point: Akhenaten's attempt at monotheism. Critical interpretation. The chapter portrays Akhenaten's pursuit of monotheism is revolutionary yet doomed, emphasizing that the rejection of deeply ingrained polytheistic traditions met resistance, hinting at the complexities of religious evolution, while Kirsch argues that monotheism may spark zealotry and conflict. Alternative interpretations from scholars like Karen Armstrong and her work The History of God suggest that cultural and historical contexts deeply influence religious practices. This challenges the assertion that monotheism intrinsically leads to violence, encouraging readers to consider that varying interpretations exist around faith's evolution. Chapter 2: What did pagans do? The case against classical paganism. The biblical condemnation of polytheism centers on the rejection of any deity besides the one true God. Pagan worship, characterized by a wide range of rituals and practices, is perceived as a direct affront to monotheism. Despite the variety in pagan rituals from ancient burial rites to Greek and Roman worship, all pagans share the common trait of worshipping multiple deities. This resulted in paganism being viewed as a significant cultural foe to monotheism during the Roman Empire's apex. Pagan practices and perceptions. The Bible presents pagan rituals, including idolatry, human sacrifice, and practices viewed as abominable in a critical light. While there are extravagant portrayals of rituals involving debauchery, evidence suggests that many of these practices may have been exaggerated or misunderstood. Some scholars argue that terms like temple prostitute might have referred to roles like midwives or healers instead of promiscuous individuals. Furthermore, paganism had its own forms of moral and sexual regulations, being as concerned about order and societal norms as the monotheistic faiths. Female deities and practices. Paganism recognized both male and female deities, with women often serving as priestesses and playing essential roles in rituals, trades, and ceremonies related to female deities focused on key human experiences such as fertility and healing. However, these women were also accused of immoral behavior by monotheistic critics, even with their perceived lasciviousness. Many pagan rituals were rooted in community values and principles. Sacrifices and human sacrifice. Human sacrifice is portrayed in biblical text as a severe sin. Yet archaeological findings reveal that animal sacrifices became a more common and accepted form of offering over time. Pagan rituals transitioned away from human sacrifices as societal norms evolved, leading to changes in worship practices that were paradoxically more humane than the biblical condemnation suggested. Pagan tolerance and beliefs. Pagan belief systems were notably inclusive and varied, allowing individuals to worship multiple deities. This cultural amalgamation led to what could be termed spiritual overinsurance, where practitioners sought favor from various gods, including Yahweh, demonstrating a contrast in religious approaches between monotheists and pagans. Monotheistic expressions viewed this tolerance as a significant failing, invoking imagery of moral corruption and apostasy. Conclusion: the perceived sins of paganism often mirrored practices within monotheistic religions, highlighting the paradoxes. Within religious condemnation, the coexistence of multiple beliefs and the open-mindedness of paganism led to deep-rooted animosity from monotheist rigorists who sought to establish religious purity in contrast to what they viewed as the debauched intricacies of pagan worship. The chapter ultimately shows that classical paganism was a complex and varied belief system malignantly portrayed by its monotheistic competitors. Chapter 3: Terror and True Belief. The Jewish king who reinvented the faith of ancient Israel. In this chapter, the narrative explores the contrasting depictions of violence and compassion in the biblical texts regarding the Israelites, despite significant teachings about tolerance and the ethical treatment of strangers in the Torah. Harsh passages call for the extermination of those worshipping other gods, posing questions about the true nature of monotheism and the historical context of Israel's conquests. The chapter emphasizes the concept of holy war and its scriptural justifications, indicating an evolution in religious interpretation and practice. Fear and dread. The text examines God's commands to the Israelites to conquer Canaan and eradicate its inhabitants, often depicted as a divine mandate for violence against pagans. These acts of zeal, like those of Phinehas and King Saul, are framed within a theological context where failure to execute God's commands could have severe repercussions. The chapter elucidates how these notions of divine wrath and zealous warfare contributed to the establishment of monotheistic belief systems that emphasized strict adherence to Yahweh alone, the man who invented biblical Israel. The chapter introduces King Josiah, who is portrayed as a pivotal figure in the transition to a strict monotheism in ancient Israel, enacting significant reforms influenced by a newly discovered scroll of the Torah. Josiah's reign is marked. Chapter 4: Confessors and Traitors. Confessors and traitors. Pagans and Christians go to war in ancient Rome. By the 1st century CE, as Rome's empire reached its zenith, classical paganism was in decline, seen by many Romans as outdated folklore rather than genuine belief. The rituals performed by the state were not aimed at fulfilling spiritual needs but at securing divine favor for the empire, encompassing the well-being of the emperor and success in military endeavors. Ordinary citizens found little comfort in official cult ceremonies designed for statecraft, leading to a void that new religions began to fill. Various Eastern mystery religions, characterized by their vibrant rituals and promises of divine engagement, started attracting Romans. The cults of deities like Mithra, Magna, Mater, Isis, and the Jewish god Yahweh gained traction. A significant percentage of the population became involved in Jewish practices, while some began to follow Jesus of Nazareth, leading to the emergence of Christianity. The early Christians distinguished themselves through strict monotheism and engaged the pagan population in what they viewed as a holy war against polytheism, which they deemed counterfeit. Mystery religions of the era offered intimate spiritual experiences absent in classical pagan practices, emphasizing personal salvation and direct encounters with the divine. Philosophers also contributed to the spiritual landscape, offering ethical counsel and seeking to distill divine principles from the myriad gods and goddesses. However, the rise of Neoplatonism synthesized philosophy and mystery, proposing both a supreme deity and a system of lower divine beings, demonstrating the syncretism present in the spiritual milieu of Rome. Initially, Christians were a sect within Judaism, but internal debates over whether adherence to Jewish law was necessary for converts led to divisions. Paul, a pivotal figure in early Christianity, advocated for a more universal approach to faith, allowing pagan converts to join without the baggage of Jewish customs. The Great Fire of 64 CE marked a turning point as emperor Nero scapegoated Christians for the disaster. This ignited persecutions, where Christians refused to participate in state rituals to appease the old gods, which the pagans interpreted as treason. The Christians resisted such compliance to the point of martyrdom, viewing it as a testament to their faith. Despite their relatively modest numbers, stories of Christian martyrdom circulated widely, enhancing the narrative of their struggle against paganism. A dichotomy arose between confessors who bravely faced persecution and traitors who betrayed their faith for safety. Over time, Christianity evolved from a persecuted sect to a sanctioned religion, ultimately reshaping the landscape of belief in the Roman Empire, culminating in its adoption as the state religion under a ruler who bridged paganism and Christianity. Example, key point, the rise of Christianity amidst persecution. Example, imagine living in a time when your spiritual beliefs put you at direct odds with long-standing state rituals as you refuse to partake in pagan ceremonies. Risking your life, you feel your faith deepen, transforming fear into a profound sense of community with other Christians who, like you, choose martyrdom over compliance. This act of defiance not only shapes your identity but also becomes a pivotal moment in religious history as Christianity, once a marginalized sect, begins to spread, resonating with the yearning for genuine spiritual connection among ordinary Romans. Disillusioned by diminishing pagan rituals, critical thinking. Key point, the rise of Christianity from persecution to state religion marked a significant cultural shift in ancient Rome. Critical interpretation. This chapter elucidates how early Christians, despite facing dire consequences, staunchly resisted pagan practices, interpreting their refusal as a fundamental aspect of faith. While the author posits this resistance as a righteous stand against perceived oppression, it's essential to recognize that interpretations of faith and resistance can vary widely. Notably, some historians argue that the conversions were pragmatic reactions to societal changes rather than purely spiritual awakenings. See the rise of Christianity by Rodney Stark for an alternative perspective. Thus, while Kirsch portrays the Christians as heroic confessional figures, one must consider the broader social and political dynamics at play, suggesting that religious transformation can be influenced by a multitude of factors beyond mere faith. Chapter 5. In this Sign, Conquer overview, the encounter of Christ and Constantine. The chapter explores the pivotal moment when Christianity transitioned from a persecuted faith to the state religion of Rome, highlighting the intertwined lives of Emperor Constantine and his Christian conversion. The background of Constantine, born to a soldier named Constantius Chlorus and Helena, a commoner with dubious origins, Constantius rose in rank and abandoned Helena for a politically advantageous marriage, but retained affection for Constantine. Political dynamics of Roman rule. The tetrarchy system established by Diocletian split power among four emperors, resisting monarchical rule. Traditional pagan values in Rome, no single ruler and multi-deity worship, came under strain as imperial power centralized Diocletian's reign and persecution. Diocletian initiated the Great Persecution against Christians, driven by fears of monotheism undermining traditional Roman gods. The crackdown saw brutal torture and executions of Christians, highlighting a clash between paganism and emerging Christianity. Constantine's ascendancy. After Constantius's death, Constantine leveraged his military standing and support from his father's troops to declare himself Augustus, despite not being the traditional successor. Ambition for sole rule. The Battle of the Milvian Bridge. On the eve of battle against Maxentius, Constantine reported a vision of the Christian cross and the phrase in hoc signo vinces, indicating divine support. Constantine's victory at the Milvian Bridge led to his rise as a key imperial figure and foreshadowed the establishment of Christianity in Rome. The significance of Constantine's vision. Varied interpretations of Constantine's vision, a divine encounter or mere atmospheric phenomenon. Eusebius and Lactantius presented contrasting accounts, merging Constantine's pagan heritage with his newfound Christian identity. Conclusion: a new era. Constantine's military success and subsequent actions mark the advent of Christianity's dominance in Rome, symbolized by the severed head of Maxentius held aloft. The significance of Constantine's vision. Varied interpretations of Constantine's vision, a divine encounter or mere atmospheric phenomenon. Eusebius and Lactantius presented contrasting accounts, merging Constantine's pagan heritage with his newfound Christian identity. Conclusion: a new era. Constantine's military success and subsequent actions mark the advent of Christianity's dominance in Rome, symbolized by the severed head of Maxentius held aloft. Chapter 6: The Harlot in the Bishop's Bed. The war within the Christian Church over the divinity of Christ. The chapter discusses the internal conflicts within the Christian Church regarding the nature of Christ's divinity. During the time of Emperor Constantine, after he consolidated power in the Roman Empire and enacted the Edict of Milan, which legalized Christianity. Constantine's rise and the Edict of Milan. Following the defeat of rival emperors, Constantine solidified his power by marrying Licinia's sister and securing recognition of his authority despite Licinia's pagan beliefs. The Edict of Milan was established, promoting religious toleration and restoring rights to Christians, marking the end of the Great Persecution, the peace of the Church. The edict was a pragmatic measure rather than an endorsement of Christianity, emphasizing a return to a state of religious freedom where Christianity was on par with other religions, despite the perceived blessings of this edict. Tensions arose as the Church struggled with internal division and the treatment of those who had denied their faith during persecutions, the Church of the Martyrs, and new conflicts. This era saw the emergence of the Church of the Martyrs, led by Donatists, who rejected the authority of compromise-driven bishops like Menturius and Cecilian, holding them accountable for perceived betrayals of sects within Christianity, and the resulting schisms led to intensified doctrinal disputes and physical confrontations, heresies, and theological debates. The chapter outlines the theological debates that arose. Chapter 7: The Ruler of the Whole World. The invention of the totalitarian state by the first Christian emperor of Rome. Constantine's ambition was to eliminate disunity within Christianity, positioning himself as an intermediary for theological disputes, notably Arianism. He prioritized monotheism, which aligned with his desire for central authority, paralleling the power of the Christian God with his rule over the Roman Empire. This move indicated his preference for order over chaos, as monotheism demanded absolute obedience compared to the flexibility of polytheism, the first totalitarian state in history. Constantine's rule set the stage for a totalitarian state, implementing a system of imperial couriers similar to secret police to suppress dissent. Though worried about theological disputes, his main concern was political stability, leading him to consult traditional diviners while disallowing pagan practices that could incite rebellion against him. His efforts to unify the Church, particularly against groups like the Donatists, included banishment and seizure of churches, but he refrained from using torture, exemplifying a blend of tolerance and coercion. The Council of Nicaea in 325, Constantine convened the Council of Nicaea to resolve internal strife among Christians. He provided great hospitality to the bishops, leveraging his influence to achieve a unified church under his authority, mirroring the empire's Governance. The proceedings aimed to establish unity and curb the infighting that he deemed harmful. Failure of the council. Despite Constantine's intentions, the council failed to achieve its primary goals as disputes persisted, particularly regarding the Arian controversies. The council's resolution, the Nicene Creed, was quickly rejected by some, proving that theological debates continued to thrive, highlighting the challenges of consolidating power both politically and religiously. Constantine's personal purge, in a bid to eliminate potential rivals, including his son Crispus and wife Fausta, Constantine resorted to executions, motivated by fear of conspiracy rather than genuine justice. These actions showcased his ruthlessness as both a father and emperor. The city of Constantine, seeking to establish a new capital, Constantine founded Constantinople, blending both Christian and pagan traditions. This city symbolized his power, incorporating pagan rituals into the dedication and employing pagan symbolism alongside Christian elements to legitimize his rule. Constantine's deterioration and legacy. As he aged, Constantine became increasingly detached from his earlier appearance, yet he continued to seek absolute power. The question of his faith lingered, with historians divided over whether he was a true convert or merely politically motivated in his embrace of Christianity. His eventual baptism right before death marked a complex relationship with faith, as he straddled between his pagan past and the emerging Christian identity of the empire he had helped shape. Ultimately, Constantine died while many subjects remained pagan, and the Christian movement he initiated was only just beginning, with its future uncertain. Chapter 8: The Orphans of Misenum. Overview. This chapter discusses the aftermath of Constantine's death and the drastic power struggles that ensued among his sons. It traces the transition from relative tolerance of paganism to its open persecution under the reign of Constantine's sons, culminating in the rise of Julian, the last surviving orphan of the imperial family. The death of Constantine. Constantine, upon his death, was commemorated in a lavish military funeral, marking a shift towards strict Christian governance over pagan practices. His death led to chaos as power shifted to his sons Constantine II, Constantius II, and Constans, who feared losing their claims. The blood purge following the discovery of a forged will. The sons of Constantine executed numerous relatives to eliminate threats, leading to a devastating purge marked by familial betrayals. Notable victims included several half-brothers, cousins, and close associates, with only two young boys, Gallus and Julian, spared from the slaughter. Division of the empire. The empire was divided between the three brothers, who ruled as co-emperors. However, their reign was characterized by rivalry and theological disputes between Arianism and Orthodox Christianity. The brothers engaged in warfare against each other, despite their shared Christian faith, driven by ambitions and territorial disputes. The rise of Constantius II and the persecution of paganism. Constantius II escalated tensions against pagan practices, eventually leading to official decrees that criminalized pagan rites and closed temples. This era marked the beginning of organized persecution. Despite initial half-hearted enforcement, pagan resistance persisted, culminating in a pagan coup led by Magnentius against Constans. The orphans of Misenum, Gallus and Julian, raised in isolation after their fathers' execution, were monitored by Constantius II to prevent any threats to his power. Gallus was later summoned to serve as Caesar, performing effectively, but also drawing the jealousy of Constantius II. Bloodshed and betrayal. Constantius II, feeling threatened by Gallus's rise, orchestrated his execution, nearly completing the eradication of Constantine's lineage. Julian, the last surviving heir, remained amidst the unfolding chaos, ultimately positioning himself to reclaim power for paganism. Conclusion: the chapter illustrates the brutal conflicts following Constantine's legacy, highlighting a shift from tolerance to active hostility against paganism while foreshadowing the eventual resurgence of Julian, the orphaned heir, in a deeply fractured and chaotic Roman Empire. Chapter 9: The Secret Pagan, Julian's arrival at court. Julian, summoned to the imperial court by Constantius II, stops at Ilion in ancient Troy, where he secretly studies paganism, aided by Bishop Pegasius, who deceptively maintains the pagan temples. Julian observes the bishop's indifference to Christian scorn for pagan icons, hinting at a shared affinity for ancient beliefs. The Christian upbringing, raised as a Christian alongside his brother Gallus, Julian experienced a strict Christian education that ultimately fueled his discontent with Christianity. Despite initial piety, he increasingly found the faith wanting, especially given its association with the murder of his father at the hands of a Christian. Influential figures, Julian's tutor, Mardonius, plays a critical role in his intellectual and moral development, encouraging an admiration for classical pagan texts despite the emperor's attempts to shield him from pagan influences. This strong connection to his tutor remains a lifeline amid his tumultuous upbringing. The decision for paganism. Although the exact moment of Julian's shift to paganism is unclear, it evidently unfolded gradually during his youth in isolation. His exposure to Neoplatonism and mystery religions deepened his longing for spiritual fulfillment. Chapter 10: Behold, the rivers are running backwards. The pagan counter-revolution of the Emperor Julian. Julian, cautious about direct conflict over the imperial crown with Constantius II, had significant grievances against him. In an overture, he proposed a power-sharing arrangement, but Constantius II's response was scornful, emphasizing Julian's childhood hardships. This confrontation led Julian to assert himself with a public display of authority and a decree of toleration that decriminalized the worship of old gods, countering Christian legislation, propaganda, and psychological warfare. As the rivalry escalated, Julian received reports of an impending attack from Constantius II, prompting him to seek divine guidance through a vision, seemingly predicting Constantius's demise. With preparations underway, Julian utilized propaganda, notably through letters, to rally support for his cause against Constantius II's rise to power. Upon reaching the Balkans, Julian learned of Constantius II's sudden death, leading to his unchallenged ascension as the sole emperor. He embraced his paganism openly, offering sacrifices and restoring ancient traditions, marking his reign as a pagan messiah meant to counter the Christian legacy. A gift of purple slippers, Julian enacted a series of purges within the imperial administration, replacing those disloyal with like-minded pagans. His disdain for imperial excesses fostered a more ascetic court lifestyle. Despite his strictness, he demonstrated whimsy, gifting purple slippers to a citizen accused of ambition. The gentle persecutor. Despite accusations of persecution, Julian pursued a more tolerant approach, contrasting his decrees with those of his predecessors. He sought to create religious parity among faiths, reinstating privileges to paganism while limiting church influence by invoking public forms of worship. Against the Galileans. Julian's philosophical critiques of Christianity were sharp, ridiculing core tenets and advocating for classical paganism's return as a broader cultural movement. He prohibited Christian educators from teaching pagan texts, asserting superiority in classical knowledge. The priest and his goose. Julian's desire to revitalize paganism faced stark realities, as he found the state of classical worship in decline during a visit to a temple, highlighting the challenge of rekindling fervor for ancient traditions. The Church of the Gods and Goddesses, echoing Christian structure, Julian attempted to establish a hierarchical pagan church that embraced all deities while promoting ethical conduct among priests. His efforts encountered the inherent challenge of uniformity within a pluralistic belief system. Skulls in the crypt. Both pagans and Christians committed acts of violence during Julian's reign, leading to brutal reprisals and confrontations, revealing the intensity of sectarian conflict within the empire. One stone upon another, Julian intended to rebuild the temple in Jerusalem to honor Jewish faith, aiming to provoke Christians while uplifting the Jewish community. However, construction faced supernatural setbacks believed by many to be divine disapproval. To the Persian front, as Julian prepared for war with Persia, he drew upon divine signs and past victories to bolster morale among his troops, asserting his commitment to sacrifice for his country. A willing sacrifice, despite initial successes against the Persian forces. Julian's fortunes waned following ominous omens in a fateful battle. He was mortally wounded, leading to speculation among various factions regarding the nature of his death, which was celebrated by Christians as a triumph over paganism. The chapter reflects Julian's struggle to affirm his pagan faith in a transitioning empire while marking the delicate interplay of religion, power, and identity during his reign. Summary of Chapter 11 from God Against the Gods by Jonathan Kirsch. Overview. Chapter 11 delves into the complex intersection of paganism and early Christianity, exploring themes of religious conflict, philosophical discourse, and cultural synthesis during a crucial historical period. The chapter examines key figures, events, and ideas that contributed to the transformation of religious beliefs and practices in the ancient world. Key themes: religious conflict and persecution. The tensions between pagans and Christians intensified, especially during the Great Persecution, leading to significant cultural and religious turmoil. Julian the Apostate's efforts to revive traditional pagan practices faced backlash from rising Christian orthodoxy. The destruction of pagan temples and libraries, notably the Serapeum, symbolized the conflict over cultural heritage and religious identity. Philosophical discourse. The chapter highlights the philosophical underpinnings of paganism, particularly Neoplatonism, and its influence on Christian thought. Key philosophical figures and texts are discussed, revealing the intellectual debates surrounding divination, ethics, and the nature of the divine. Cultural synthesis. The assimilation of pagan traditions into early Christianity is examined, showcasing how Christian practices adopted elements of pagan rituals. The concept of religious syncretism is crucial, with examples from various cultural contexts demonstrating the fluidity of religious beliefs. Notable figures and events. The chapter features discussion on pivotal historical figures, such as Constantine the Great, whose reign marked the establishment of Christianity as a state religion. Important events like the Council of Nicaea and the Edict of Milan are analyzed for their roles in shaping the Christian and pagan landscapes. Impact on modern understanding. Kirsch draws connections between historical religious conflicts and contemporary issues of religious tolerance and persecution. The ongoing relevance of these themes is noted, urging readers to reflect on the legacy of ancient struggles for religious identity. Conclusion. Chapter 11 provides a richly detailed exploration of the dynamic interplay between paganism and Christianity, illustrating how historical events and philosophical ideas shaped the religious landscape of the ancient world and beyond. The implications of these transformations continue to resonate in modern discussions of faith, culture, and identity.